Hello. Um, Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nicholas Valenzia. Some of you know me, so if you doesn't know me, I'm an aviation lawyer. And this is Wayne Pisani, who is a Grant Thornton partner. But he's also here representing the Malta Financial Services Advisory Council, which is known as the MFSAC. So the first question you'll all ask is, what has the Malta Financial Services Advisory Council to do with corporate jet investor and corporate jets?
I'm told that the organizers were looking for a hairstyle pairing, so that's why we ended up here. But besides that, then the conversation evolved to what is the country doing in this space, and how is aviation, the success of the aviation sector, the 9H and all percolating towards within the whole ecosystem. And by way of background, the MSAC, which I appreciate is quite a tongue twist, started off around 5 years ago. It's made up of a group of stakeholders hailing from the financial industry. So it's not just financial services, but it includes the registries and so forth. And the idea was to articulate a 10-year strategy for Malta in the financial service sector. And there we split into various pillars. And to cut a long story short, aviation leasing is one of the key pillars that was identified 3-4 years ago as a growth area, and that's where then obviously we started working with the industry in order to see what are the changes or fine-tunings that we need to make to continue building on other successful factors that we've seen.
So when you say, so I understand this is something which is essentially government-driven ultimately, besides stakeholder-driven.
Yes.
So this is a part of Malta's vision.
It sits within the Ministry for Finance, and in fact, Finance Malta, which is a public-private partnership between government and the private sector, is a key stakeholder there, together with the stock exchange, MFSA, MBR, and so forth. But yes, it's driven. The strategy is owned by the ministry, yes, drafted in consultation with the various stakeholders, but yes, it's a ministry government-driven.
So let's go straight to the point. So what are the main incentives which are being, let's say, propagated or proposed by government? What is being seen? So a lot of the audience today are mainly operators, but they're not just what I call the pure operator, right? There are ownership interests around the table. There are people who arrange for finance around the table, even if it is within operator pools. I'm seeing a couple of clients, friends, and contacts and counterparts. So Malta has never really attracted the financial part of this side of the world. So what is being proposed? What are you looking at?
Okay, so I mean, the thought process is as follows. I mean, you can regulate in order to attract business, or else if you already have an industry which is present in Malta, then you continue amplifying the success factors in other areas. And in this case, the industry is already in Malta, and we were seeing how can we supplement further. And one of the obvious areas is basically in order to fly it, you need to finance it, so putting it bluntly. And when looking at the peculiar legislative framework that we have in financial services, especially in the financing side, we noticed that financing aircraft would have required a license, and therefore we started working on a framework in order to remove the licensing requirement. Now, there is still the conversation going, but there is an advanced, basically agreed draft, if I can put it this way, whereby any basically entity set up in Malta can finance by submitting a notification to the Malta Financial Services Authority in terms of its intention to run finance lease operations. There is an indicative threshold which is currently in the region of 100 million. The own funds requirements, because basically your financing from own funds can be made up even of assets. So, and there is an annual check as to these assets. In terms of what an actual notification to the Financial Services Authority would entail, the commitment or the intention is that there would be a 20-day turnaround in terms of approval of notification from submission of complete application. And this is not something that we're creating afresh to a certain extent. There is already a proven track record with notified professional investor funds, notified hedge funds, where we use the same process where anyone wanting to set up a fund, which qualifies as a notified PIF, would submit the notification. They would appoint a KYC agent approved by the MFSA, where there are a list of them already there, to run the fitness and properness assessment of the individuals who would be sitting within the lessor company.
So essentially the product which Malta is looking into is the finance lease product. It can be used for corporate jetliners, whatever. Essentially,
yes,
right?
The intention is aviation and maritime, to be fair, because they're linked.
Yep.
But yes, it's across the board for anything which entails the financing of these kind of asset classes.
And so practically, just to understand, so today, what we have on the ground, if you need to have a finance lease operation, not an operative lease operation, because that is totally deregulated, but if you have a finance lease operation, you would need a license if you had to offer it today.
Basically, yes, in terms of the Financial Institutions Act, we'll not bore you with it, but yes, it would entail a whole licensing process as if you were a credit institution.
So practically all this would see the possibility of a So it's essentially deregulated.
It's deregulating it, obviously retaining the parameters from a risk management perspective, anti-money laundering and so forth, but ultimately, yes, it is.
And this 100 million, this capital requirement, can it be satisfied with planes and ownership,
yes,
which you finance?
It includes assets and so forth, and there is an annual check about it, basically, that it's submitted to the MFSA as part of the balance sheet reporting.
Good. I think it's a good initiative. I think people out here who are in this, obviously you're all in the industry, but who have an interest in the finance lease world will definitely find this extremely interesting. Also because we hope that Malta will match up to its reputation, which has come from the operative point of view, but we hope that at least...
I'd say that yes. I mean, over the past, I'd say years or even decades at this point, a lot of changes were introduced which have made the 9H a success story. If we look at the cell companies, which was one of the recent or last major development, again, it was something that was innovative. It's used, and we envisage that combining such setups within the financial lease operation, where you've got cells which are segregating risks and so forth, you can structure them with bespoke financing arrangement and so forth, but still managing the efficiency, which goes beyond a group of companies, because ultimately we have one legal entity, but the cells then identified even for tax purposes separately. We believe that we will combine the degree of lowish compliance costs with comparing ourselves to competing jurisdictions. We managed to have the efficiencies of scale that
So I believe the cells were introduced a couple of years ago.
Just two, I think.
Yeah, they were, but I think never really marketed, at least from a Maltese perspective.
I think we're victims of our own way, because I think in the financial and legal space, we've always tried to promote Malta through regulation. And when you're churning out regulation, what happens is that there would be so many changes that you either end up speaking technically and you bore the people or the audience, or else they get forgotten. But ultimately, my take about where Malta is going, and this applies across the board, we're trying to navigate, let's call it European Union complexity, with the benefit of being nimble. Obviously, there are areas where we need to catch up. There are other areas where we are quite ahead. I mean, if you look at the Cape Town Convention and where we stand, I think we're quite leaders there, and it would be silly of us not to identify any pain points that we're hearing from the industry and work around the hurdles, if I can put it this way, to come up with a more nimble solution. And the beauty of the having this set up with MFSA and all is that it's not just the industry talking and lobbying, but we're sitting around the table with the key decision makers to make change happen, not just talking about it.
Yes, in fact, I mean, as part of the initiatives which were recently introduced, even from the last round with the MFSAC vis-à-vis leasing, I think there were some new amendments to the Companies Act facilitating the takeover of companies which have their shares pledged.
Yeah.
Also some flexibility, more flexibility from Malta Customs. There's a lot of flexibility from Malta Customs, but there's even more flexibility from Malta Customs when it comes to planes which are on AOCs and inspections. So pretty much they're reintroducing the COVID system where you would pretty much rely on the entry on the plane rather than complicating life and sending multiple inspectors to do that. So I think the government lent a good ear here, but you're showing that now they're looking at the future and seeing what can be ultimately offered extra to the industry in order to bring a better ecosystem to Malta.
Yes, indeed. And we're not looking at things in silos. I think this is fundamental. We're looking at the whole economy. So we're looking at the spillover of aviation. So looking at what we're doing in financial services, for example, there's a huge drive to facilitate, I mentioned notified professional investor funds earlier. It's part of a whole framework which is intended to attract family offices and private clients in order to set up investment vehicles through Malta. Now, it's a space which is obviously a type of area where aviation plays a crucial part even in family offices. So again, it's part of the
because I think obviously seeing the demographic and of the guests here, it's quite evident there are people who are extremely close to individuals who would typically be, let's say, the subject, or rather the interest, have a keen interest in family offices. So without going into too much detail, can you just give us an idea of what this whole family office initiative is? At least if there's someone out here who could be interested in it, because obviously we're dealing with high net worth individuals. It's not just the financial services practitioners here, but there are even the heads of the operations here who can actually have direct interest in this.
So the principle, the first brief that we started off with is, let's see why regulate. And all proposals that are coming out of these work groups and committees are, let's identify the risk that we're trying to allay through regulation and make sure that the regulation is commensurate to the risk that is being allayed. Instead of throwing the rule book at each and every situation, let's say there are different grades or triaging a situation. And we're dealing with family offices and high net worth individuals and so forth. You've got a caliber of risk appetite that is not the same as retail that you're seeing. So what we're looking there was, again, similar to what we mentioned about financial leasing, is that we deregulated certain requirements for collective investment schemes, for funds, that you just file a notified professional investor, notified PIF. Similarly, where a family office sets up itself as a family trust, again, instead of requiring a fund manager and requiring a licensed trustee, you've got a body of individuals that would restrict the investment to family and friends as defined, and therefore, like that, you're curtailing or controlling the risk exposure to retail, because ultimately it's family and friends who know what basically they're putting skin in the game and what they're in for, whilst providing a platform, a regulatory platform, which is notified with the Financial Service Authority and all, within which to operate. So we're balancing clarity of regulation with ease of compliance by balancing the two aspects and making sure that on the board you discuss strategy more than compliance, because over the past decade we ended up discussing more compliance than strategy.
I think that's important. So practically this issue is essentially allowing for family office setups to work in a deregulated context totally in Malta,
yes,
when it comes to their investment portfolio.
We're not talking about being cowboys in the space, so it's always controlled within a controlled environment. So it's not a glorified holding company, there are still parameters to be followed, but it's not the reporting obligations that you're always under control. There is the delegated responsibility with the board, with the mind and management of the setup, that they have to shoulder responsibility and make sure that the operations are going, and like that the MFSA is entrusting the intermediary to do its part.
And to oversee. And practically it will be based on notification, not pure regulation.
Exactly.
Similarly to what is being proposed with the leasing infrastructure.
The goal, Nick, is here is time to market. So from the idea to get go, if it takes a year, it's too much. So the idea has always been to try and control that to ideally not exceed the demand, but if needs be, we're pushing it to at max 8 weeks in these.
And it's good to know that there is proper synergizing, because the idea of finance leasing as being focused on is actually an idea which initially was Charles's brainchild about 8 years ago, I think, when one started looking into it. So it's good that a different ministry, which is purely looking at the finance aspect, took it over, adopted it, and now has taken it. So that
Yes.
Synergizing is very, very welcome.
I'd like to add something, though, because I mentioned Ministry for Finance and all in terms of SAC. Let's also bear in mind that as things stand in these current months, the government of Malta has launched what we're colloquially referring to as Vision 2050. And again, the whole aviation cluster, but including aviation finance, is obviously included as part of this vision. But what I'm trying to get to here is that the MSA's strategy is a 10-year strategy which was kicked off in 2023. This one is at 2050, so it's more a question of now amplifying or leveraging what we're getting to, because one of them is already implementing, the other one is setting the strategy, the vision, and charting the path. So.
I would like to just clarify one point we were discussing, that the focus from a finance leasing perspective at government level and the MFSC will be limited to aviation at the moment, and shipping will be looked into after deeper market studies at a later stage. So, listen, I think the lunch break is up soon, so we don't want to keep Alistair smiling. Because this was a nice fireside talk. We could have it outside and we wouldn't even need a fire. But, so thank you all for coming. Thank you on behalf also of Corporate Jet Investor. Thank you, Wayne, and the MFSAC. And let's have a good lunch and a good afternoon.
Thank you all. Thank you. Cheers.